Good afternoon, colleagues. On behalf of the MRC, I want to welcome you all to this special webinar that we are holding. The purpose of this webinar will be to give the results of our first longitudinal cohort study that compares rape survivors and a control group of women to explore the relationship between rape over time. We will be able to spend some time discussing the results and have an in-depth discussion about what this means for policy and practice in South Africa and at a global level. For those of you who do not know what the RISE study is, it was the Rape Impact Cohort Evaluation Study and was a prospective longitudinal study that followed rape-exposed and rape non-exposed women. And this study sought to understand the long-term impact of rape, in particular if women who were raped had more risk of acquiring HIV than their counterparts that were in the control arm. Importantly, this study also explored the disease mechanism, including the psychological, physiological, social, and genetic factors that impact on women's health. So this is a very critical study, and it's very apt on World AIDS Day to discuss the role of gender-based violence in HIV acquisition in women and their vulnerability to HIV. We have some wonderful people on our panel, and first and foremost, I want to introduce you to Prof. Naeemah Abrahams. She is the lead author of the study and is the director of the Gender and Health Research Unit of the South African Medical Research Council. She is an NRF-rated scientist and has worked for decades in gender-based violence research. And her research focuses on the intersections between gender-based violence and health, including the interface with HIV. It is also concerned with the measurement of violence against women and children and femicide, and she holds an honorary position as a professor with the Women's Health Research Unit at UCT and is the lead investigator on the RISE study. We also have Dr. Mofokeng, who's on our panel, and she is a doctor who is a commissioner at the Commission for Gender Equality South Africa. At its 44th session in July 2020, the United Nations Human Rights Council appointed Dr. Mofokeng from South Africa as Special Rapporteur on the rights of everyone to the enjoyment of the highest attainable standard of physical and mental health. She is a broadcaster, a best-selling author, and is widely published. So we're very happy to have her on our panel. We also want to introduce you to Dr. Chidarikire. She is the director of the HIV prevention program in the National Department of Health, South Africa. She has a wide portfolio, including HIV testing services, linkage to care, HIV screening, index testing, male and female condoms, the management of STIs, PEP and PrEP communication, as well as prevention services for key populations. How do you do your job? This is what I want to know. It looks like an enormous one. And to add to that, she also has prevention services for youth, advocacy, communication, and social mobilization. She is a woman, I forgot, and that's why she can do all of this work together. She has more than 20 years experience in public health and more than 10 years experience in the HIV field, including clinical trials, research, and public sector engagement. She has worked in policy development, implementation, guideline development, program review, program implementation, capacity development, and quality assessment and improvement. She is the co-chair of the WHO HTS Guideline Development Group, the PEP Prevention Workstream, and the National HIV Think Tank. She holds a PhD in virology from the University of the Witwatersrand in Johannesburg. And last but not least is Dr. Advocate Pierre Smith. He is currently the acting Special Director of Public Prosecutions of the Specialized Unit in the NPA Head Office in Sexual Offences and Community Affairs, which covers all gender-based violence-related matters. He has extensive experience in this field, including the prosecution of several cases. Pierre is highly involved in specialized legislative drafting, research, and training development, and has been an international speaker at several events. So without further ado, I want to hand over to Professor Abrahams, who will take us through the study and lead the discussion on the results of it. So over to you, Naeemah.
Thank you very much for that introduction, Glenda. Let me share my screen and then we can go. Can somebody confirm that they can see my screen?
We can see it, so just, yeah, there we are. Thank you very much.
Okay, perfect. So this is a very exciting moment for me, and to release the findings of the RISE study. As Professor Glenda said, it stands for Rape Impact Cohort Evaluation. I first of all want to acknowledge a team. This was a team effort, and we had a number of co-investigators that are experts in different areas, as well as a great statistician team. I will spend the next couple of minutes just taking you through the study. It will take the normal format of introduction, methods, results, and I'll end with conclusions. Okay, so this is where we start. So the interconnections between HIV and rape is undeniable. There is so much evidence that these are two intertwining epidemics. We have more than 7 million people living with HIV in our country. It's highest for young women. Similarly, the picture of gender-based violence and rape in this country is also a picture of an epidemic. The work in Gauteng, a study in Gauteng, men who participated in the study, 37.4% of these men said that they had raped. About a quarter of the women in the study said that they had experienced the rape. We also have rapes reported to police, and in the last reporting year, there were 42,000 rapes reported to police. But we know that this is underestimated. The same Gauteng study found that women who reported a rape in the study, 1 in 25 of them said they also reported to police. If you do that simple stats, you get to 1 million rapes a year. So that speaks to an epidemic, really. Now, both HIV and rape share similar drivers. These are gender inequality, poverty, education, and then in gender-based violence, we know that the use of violence as being normative in our country is another factor that drives rape and gender-based violence. Now, the main thing is that we don't know, we don't have the evidence of the health impact of rape. It is pretty weak, not just in South Africa, all over the world. I had participated in the Global Burden of Disease study, and I was responsible to look at non-partner rape and look at the health effects of non-partner rape so that it could be included in the burden of disease. There was no longitudinal studies. There were no evidence that rape had a health impact. And this really spurred us on to do the study. So the RISE study's main aim was to determine the incidence of HIV for women for a minimum for women up to 12 months post the rape, and to compare to a cohort of women who have not been raped. The study was a bit broader than this, but today we're only going to talk about this very main, the main outcome of the study. So let me tell you about the study and the two groups. First of all, we had to have a group of women who had reported a rape. These were women that were recruited at the TCCs. There were 4 TCCs based in Durban and 1 crisis center. And the most important thing was that we had to interview this woman within 20 days of the rape event. This was to ensure that we are able to test them for HIV and we were able to determine their mental health status. So this study is about rape. We did not include non-penetrative other forms of sexual violence. If a woman was severely distressed or she had cognitive disabilities, we excluded her. We excluded women if they were involved in another study and if they were more than 14 weeks pregnant or they were breastfeeding. We then had a control group. And this control group primary focus was that they had never ever had an experience of rape. We wanted to make sure there was some similarities between the group, and that's why we recruited them at primary healthcare clinics in and around the area of the TCCs. So the exclusion I've just explained to you was if they had experienced a rape, and similarly if they were enrolled in another study, or if they were pregnant or breastfeeding a baby. These women were 16 to 40 years old. Oops, sorry, what did I, do you people still see my,
We see the slide outline, Naeemah. There we go.
see the slide. Okay, I need to, sorry. Right, click the wrong button. So let me tell you about the study methodology. So we started in 2014 and we stopped on the 25th of March in 2020, just as lockdown started. So it was a longitudinal studies where we had follow-up interviews. We wanted to make sure we followed women up for at least 12 months. The initial idea was to follow women up just for 24 months, for 2 years. But because we enrolled slowly, we were able to take some women right up to 36 months for 3 years. Interviews were done at baseline and every 3 months for the first year, and thereafter every 6 months. We did face-to-face interviews. We did biological measures, taking blood for HIV and for other biological markers. We trained the team to be sensitive about doing research with rape survivors. We had a trauma counselor that were part of the team and supported the woman, both the rape-exposed woman and our control group, as well as the research team. It's not easy to do research with rape survivors, and we gave attention to the possibility of vicarious trauma as well. We also spend a lot of effort on the retention because follow-up studies generally has got a, retention is always a problem, but particularly so for working with rape survivors. So we had a large number of variables that we measured, but for this particular part of the study, it is important for you to know that we looked at HIV testing. We did a rapid test, and then we did a confirmatory ELISA as well. And then we did a range of social behavioral data that we collected at each visit. And of particular importance was the HIV risk behaviors. Okay, so yeah, this slide tells you about the flow of the participant through the study. So we enrolled in total 1,860 women. 876 belonged to the group who reported a rape, and nearly 1,000 belonged to the group that were our control group. Soon after enrollment, a few were screened out. For the rape women, it was mainly because they arrived too late and we couldn't do it. For example, they arrived after 20 days, or they were pregnant. And similarly, the women who were in the control group were mainly screened out because we discovered that they actually did experience a rape previously. This left us with 1,799 women that continued into the study. What's important for you to know is that for this analysis, the study included people who were HIV positive. We could not exclude women who were positive, right? So in the control group, there were 369 women that were HIV positive, so they didn't become part of this analysis of incidence, and 411 were HIV positive in the women that reported a rape. So this analysis is based on 1,019 HIV negative women that were enrolled. There were some that were lost to follow-up, and you will see the lost to follow-up were greater. There were 107 in the woman who reported a rape compared to our control group. So our analysis, very briefly, we used descriptive analysis to start off to compare the baseline socio-demographic characteristics between the woman who reported a rape and the control group. And we also look at description between the incidence group, that is the group that seroconverted and the group that did not seroconvert. We calculated the HIV incidence for each group. We calculated that for each time as well. We also, in our final assessment, we looked at the effect of rape on HIV acquisition over the follow-up period. And we use a multivariate Cox regression models to obtain hazard ratios. We use many sensitivity analysis to confirm the results. And this is all available in the paper that we will give you the details of at the end. We also control for covariates. We control for age and lifetime experiences of trauma. We controlled for variables associated with loss to follow-up. And then we developed a composite score that combined two sexual risk behavior variables, and we controlled for this as well. So here is the socio-demographic differences between the two groups. We have the woman who reported a rape in purple and the woman who did not report a rape. And what you could see that the mean age were although there's a significant difference, their age was about 23 years old. So we have a young cohort here. Education, about 70% in both groups had a matric or more, and there were no difference in education. There was a difference in employment. Women who reported a rape were more likely to report that they were employed. And then we also found that the women that were in the control group were more likely, had higher levels of reporting that they depended on the child support grant as an income. We use food insecurity as a measure for poverty, and you will see that about 16% in both groups said there was sometimes or often no food in the household. We also found that largely women were in dating relationships, with the women who reported a rape more like higher levels of them saying they were not in a relationship. And I suppose that's maybe not surprising. Here is another a table, and in this table, I now compare the woman who seroconverted to the group that did not seroconvert. And here I present a few of the socio-demographic, a few of the sexual experiences and behavioral variables that may impact on HIV acquisition. And as you can see, both, there were no difference between the incidence group, the group that seroconverted and the group that did not, in terms of the age at first sex, ever a transactional partner, or whether the partner was a casual or main partner, ever IPV or non-partner sexual violence, risky alcohol use, were very similar at baseline for these two groups in terms of incidence. So here's one of the main findings. So as I said earlier, 86 women seroconverted in the study period over 1,605 person years. This, we were able to get an incidence rate. Just to note, 37 infections were in the woman who reported the rape, and 49 new infections were in the woman who were in the control group. The incidence rate for the woman who reported the rape was 6.6, and for the woman in the control group was lower at 4.7. I really searched to find the most accurate HIV incidence for the country, and that is quite difficult, and maybe I didn't quite look properly, but the HSRC incidence study found that there was a 1.5 incidence rate among South African women 15 to 24 years. I know there are studies, and we should maybe in particularly look more and compare them with the incidence rates of young women in KZN. We also found the incidence rate reported by the UN AIDS for South Africa, and this was reported at 4.9 per 100,000 person years. And that, I suppose, is closer to what we found in our control group. So what was associated with HIV seroconversion? We found lower education was associated with seroconversion. 59 amongst the women that reported a rape versus 71 amongst the group. Amongst those who seroconverted compared to those that did not seroconvert. We also found there were higher levels of past year physical intimate partner violence amongst the group who seroconverted. It was 20% versus 12%. And we also found a difference. There was a lower likelihood of reporting sexual child abuse between the two groups. So here is a graph that depicts the incidence at each time point for the two groups. The solid purple line represents the woman who reported a rape, and the dotted orange line is the woman who did not report rape. And our follow-up time is on the x-axis. So what we see here, from month 6 onwards, we start to see an increase in incidence amongst the group that reported a rape. And it continues to rise, and it nearly reaches 8, incident rate of 8. And we see it stay consistent, and it remains above 6 right up to 2 years after the rape event. Our comparison group does not show the same. And I think this is one of the most important findings of the study, is to see the difference between incidents between the two groups. So the other important thing was to determine what was the risk ratio between the two groups in terms of acquiring HIV. So in other words, how much more likely were the rape exposed woman or the woman who reported a rape to acquire HIV? When so as I explained, we use modeling to do this, the estimates for this, and we controlled for baseline characteristics. We also controlled for the multiple sexual partner and transactional sex. We also controlled for variables that were associated with retention. And we actually did a number of other models to confirm that the Cox regression model was robust. And we found that women who were exposed to rape were 60% more likely to acquire HIV compared to the control group. In this slide, I want to show you data around mental health after rape. This is based on a study done by a student who did a PhD in the RISE study, and she looked at PTSD, acquiring PTSD after rape. So this is a graph that depicts only the rape-exposed woman, right? So what we do, we've got depression, we're measuring depression, and we're measuring PTSD as well. What we did with depression, we divided depression into 4 quartiles. So the green line is the first quartile, which is low depression. That means women scored low on depression. And the fourth quartile was the quartile that depicted high depression. What you will see on the y-axis is the PTSD symptoms that we measured with the Davidson Trauma Scale. And the gray dotted line indicates where PTSD score is the cutoff score for PTSD, which is 40. Now, if you look at the green lines, the first quartile for depression, you will see that it actually drops down below the PTSD cutoff point from 3 months. But if you look at the red line, you see very high scores for depression as well as very high scores for PTSD at the start of when they enter, which is baseline. That's expected. But we see that this group remains high, the red group, up to 6 months, which is at the end of the slide. At 6 months, the group who had high depressions, high PTSD right at the start and high depression, actually never really resolved their PTSD symptoms at 6 months. This is just up to 6 months, but it clearly shows us the role of mental health in the period after rape. What we have found was at 6 months, the woman with high depression quartile also had 25% of the women continue to have PTSD at 6 months. So what does this mean? In this diagram, I'm trying to depict a very complex interplay of factors around the pathways to HIV, pathways to HIV after rape. Let's look at the rape event happen, and then the lower line where we indicate the rapist is positive. These are the women that are possibly likely to seroconvert to HIV at the time of the rape event. However, we have got PEP that can protect the woman. It also depends on the perpetrator's viral load. If it's virally suppressed, the likelihood of HIV seroconversion happening is also low. But we also know there is the factor of trauma. If it was a traumatic rape and there were vaginal injuries, the likelihood of HIV increases. We know that women, in studies that we've done, struggle to complete their PEP, and they struggle because of the mental health that they're dealing with, and they struggle because of the rape stigma. So imagine that the perpetrator is negative, right? So that's the top line. Or he is positive, but he's totally virally suppressed. So these women do not immediately unlikely to seroconvert to HIV. But now we need to recognize the factors that can come into play that will affect the woman's ability to cope, the ability to heal in order to adjust to her life and to help her to cope so that she do not enter into positions where she can increase her risk for HIV. We know that previous trauma, like child abuse and like IPV, can impact on how you experience the PTSD, how you experience the depression, as well as experience the stigma. We know that multiple traumas has a big impact on people's ability to cope when a new trauma happens. What we do know is there are protective factors. I've spoken about PEP already protecting women from the immediate HIV infection of following a rape. But we also know that women who had good social support, women who who can mitigate and help, particularly with the mental health struggles and with stigma in particular, And we also know people with higher education are able to access information in particular, are able to understand what's happening to them immediately after the rape, are able to cope with the stigma, are able to mitigate the effect that the mental health has on the period after the rape. We know that there is possibly many more other factors. We live in a very patriarchal society. Our gender norms, violence norms in our society all impacted on this. But we need to look at this in terms of how can we use this to protect women further and to support them. So in conclusion, this is the first study ever done globally where we followed up a large group of women that were reported a rape, and we followed them up soon after the rape. Many other studies in the US follow women up after rape, but they would do that a few years, and nobody really looks at HIV. A lot of focus is on mental health in these longitudinal studies. And we have demonstrated that that HIV acquisition happens in the medium and the long term after rape. And we should not really just be focusing on preventing HIV in the immediate period after the rape. We have also shown that it's most likely through indirect pathways which arise from these many factors that impact on the woman's and her experience of the rape. So the key messages from the RISE study is that women who are raped have a long-term elevated risk of acquiring HIV. We know that the risk, we also know that the risk arises from the very difficult psychic pain that the woman experiences through the trauma of the rape, which impacts on their mental health, and therefore then also increases their risk of sexual encounters and their risk for HIV. And what is important is that we should be treating the psychological trauma of rape if we want to prevent HIV infections amongst this vulnerable group. The implications for us from the study is that rape survivors need to be able to access good, quality, effective healthcare and support from the time that they report the rape until long afterwards. In fact, in the UK, the National Health System, they are allowing women who has raped lifelong psychosocial support after a rape. We have shown that there are key elements that we need of care that needs to be part of providing trauma-focused care in mental health. We need to recognize that it is the trauma that interferes with healing. Another important issue that we need to deal with and that we would want us to consider is the issue of PrEP. Women who experience rape is a vulnerable group. We have seen this in the incident rate, and they should potentially be provided long-term care after rape in terms of PrEP. We know that PrEP uptake is not that easy in our country yet. And I also know, and we will maybe hear from our respondents, that PrEP is maybe not yet considered for rape survivors, but we should consider this. We should, however, not just do it. We need to really look at how this can be done, how we will operationalize it. It's not just a matter of handing out tablets. I want to iterate. Then there's another opportunity. The 2003 National Department of Health had a post-rape care policy and a clinical guidelines. Yes, it's as old as 2003. And it has never been formalized and it's never been approved. And it's really time now for the National Department of Health to come to the party to take care of rape victims and to make sure that we incorporate in the revision of the the post-rape care policy, these findings that are presented today. And then lastly, our country is going through a rapid period of change in terms of how we're dealing with gender-based violence broadly. And so here we have the opportunity in the National Strategic Plan to really take care and the healthcare of rape survivors seriously. One of the pillars speak about healing, and it's now time for us to really not just use it as a term within the National Strategic Policy, but to really act on making sure we provide the best quality care for rape survivors. That's the end of my presentation. I want to say thank you to the amazing RISE team. There were a group of researchers and field workers who took on a very difficult task of really working and researching rape survivors and holding them through the process. I want to thank the National Department of Health and the NPA for recognizing the importance and supporting us through giving us access. And then lastly, I want to say thanks to participants. They joined the study really because they believe they could contribute to improving the lives of women, and we really need to honor their contribution. The study cannot be done without their contribution, their data. We have developed a research brief, which is a bit more accessible, and the website is here, and the paper the manuscript of this part of the RISE study will appear in the AIDS Journal around about mid-December onwards. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Naeemah, for presenting the impact of rape and gender-based violence, both on the mental state of women and their physical vulnerability. And I'm sure as you follow up these participants, you will see long-term biological as well as the post-traumatic stress. I need to remind everybody that this was a flagship project. It is one of MRC's highlighted flagship project and was funded by the MRC. And so we're very proud that you've made so much impact in this area. So, and I'm sure we're going to hear a lot more questions about this. But well done to the team. We are very proud of you and the work that you're doing in women's health, and particularly the role of gender-based violence and highlighting it. So I'm going to ask our panelists some questions, and then I will move, and then I will hand over to Dr. Shah, who will facilitate a discussion with the people that have joined as observers. But my first question goes to Dr. Mofokeng, and this is around civil society and other stakeholders. And so I would like to know how we will move these findings forward. We've seen the devastating impact that rape has had on mental health and on the physical well-being of women. And so what can we do to help prevent and respond to gender-based violence in South Africa, and how can we use these findings to influence what happens? And how do we implement the policy as stated in the National Strategic Plan for gender-based violence and femicide, and how can we use this information in civil society and add to the work that they're currently doing? So I'm going to ask Dr. Mofokeng to respond. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Glenda, and good afternoon, colleagues. Good morning or good evening from wherever you are joining us in the world. Just firstly to say that violence in all its forms is a major obstacle for the realization of the right to health. And this study is relevant to my work as a commissioner at the Commission for Gender Equality, as it is a national human rights institution that's mandated to end all oppression leading to gender inequality. And of course, as the United Nations independent expert, the mandate, and the scope tasks me to apply a gender perspective in the execution of the mandate and to pay attention to the situation of vulnerable and marginalized groups. And in this country that we live in, South Africa, statistics continue to show us that there is an increase in the extent of gender-based violence and femicide. And I would argue that there's another pandemic that is sexuality-based femicide, where Black lesbian women particularly are experiencing homophobic rape because of their gender, they are women, but also their sexuality, being lesbian, gives them a higher vulnerability. And of course, we know that abuse and rape in this country is noted as some of the highest in the world. Now, the findings of this SAMRC study, of course, are indicating that women who are raped have a higher chance of getting HIV infections for several months after the ordeal compared to women who have not been raped. And we know the long-term impact of rape on both mental health, post-rape stigma, as well as socioeconomic and physical sexual health. The study is demonstrating the urgency with which our country must firstly acknowledge the severe consequences of rape on those who are victimized or survivors of rape, and prioritize and provide high quality support for post-rape survivors. What needs to be done has been alluded in parts in the National Strategic Plan, Pillar 4, which calls on a multi-sectorial effort to address these issues around GBVF. And I agree that post-rape policies must be very clear and aligned across health, justice, as well as policing, as well as psychosocial services. And especially where policies are lacking, there must be a demand for immediate addressing of those issues. With the HIV findings specifically, we know the importance of providing post-exposure prophylaxis. As a medical doctor myself, a community service worker at the time, I had worked in many forensic clinics, which we call Thuthuzela clinics. And even at the time, almost 13 years ago, we were already experiencing chronic stockouts of essential medicines in these Thuthuzela centers for people who have survived rape, thereby increasing their risk of acquiring HIV immediately after the rape. But we know that in the few weeks and months when there's a delay in timeous access to Thuthuzela centers, that the risk of women increases. The issue around mental health findings is also very important. We know that many of these Thuthuzela centers are very far and few apart. And in terms of mental health support, many of the women-led institutions in the communities are being offered by women who themselves are either just activists or survivors of violence, are not necessarily psychologists or counselors or even social workers. And so we, again, burden women in communities who are doing the best with what they have, which is bare minimum, with offering each other support and care, which they will do anyway. But I think there are major gaps in terms of the system. And we must be careful, of course, not to misinterpret what is causing women's HIV risk, to increase in this instance, because often when we hear about HIV, we often hear about risky sexual behavior. And the shame and the stigma that is then put on women who survive rape and violence means that they may not present timeously for care, if at all. And we know that in South Africa, first sexual experiences are also experiencing a lot of coercion and force. And in some instances, people don't even know until decades later that what they experienced was actually coercion and sexual harassment. The justice system also takes far too long to deal with rape cases, some anywhere between 1 and 5 years, where victims are constantly having to appear in court with postponements. We know the delays in terms of the DNA processing of the results, the loss in dockets. And the question is, why does this leave victims and survivors? And it was really a long time, even in the public health sector, where the link between violence and health was not sufficiently understood. And this is why it's important that the work of the SAMRC finds expression and guides the interventions, such as the ones at the CGE and other national human rights institutions. We need more research to investigate other intersecting issues, such as access to safe abortion for rape survivors within the public sector. We need to look at the issues around sex workers as a group of women who also face multiple layers of structural violence, and they cannot report this violence, whether it's intimate partner violence or rape by clients, as well as police themselves. And the CGE is currently engaged in public investigative hearings on the state of shelters in South Africa. We've previously released reports such as Fighting Fire Without Fire, Painting Over All Cracks, and this was looking particularly at the multi-sectoral responses. And again, our country is failing to comprehensively and sustainably offer dignified services for survivors. This issue is urgent. Another way that we can really address this issue of accountability, and it's just to remind all of us now wearing my United Nations hat, that in accordance with Resolution 2002/31, the special rapporteurs respond to information received and considered to be reliable on allegations of violations of the right to health. by writing to the government concerned, either together with other special procedures or independently, inviting governments to comment and give clarity on the allegation of human rights abuse. And we need to understand that as much as GBVF in South Africa has been declared a pandemic, the political will and the resourcing on this issue is really subpar. And for me, it is a human rights violation. It's a continuing human rights violation, and the concerns relate not only to the bills and legislations and policies, but also to the practices that don't comply with international human rights laws and standards as we currently speak. It takes far too long for us to move from a bill to legislation where we can literally in practice ensure that women and girls and all survivors of gender-based violence receive adequate care. In closing, colleagues, I just want to say that the right of everyone to the highest attainable standard of physical and mental health is a right that is interconnected with other rights, such as the right to information, the right to freedom and security of the person, the right to equality and non-discrimination, and the right to bodily autonomy. Protection from all forms of violence is a cross-cutting issue present in all key elements of the realization of the right to health. And South Africa has an obligation to protect and promote and to address in a comprehensive and proactive way, not only as a cause of serious violations of human rights, but also as a consequence of a lack of political will to effectively invest in human rights, including the right to health, and in this instance, the way that it impacts and further positions women to have a higher risk of HIV acquisition. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for highlighting the human rights violation and also the issues of stigma and discrimination. Very important to remind us of this huge violation of human rights. So I'm going to ask the Department of Health, Thato, if you're still on. I know you're on a cell phone, and we really appreciate, we know that time is of the essence and that you are really helping us here. And so as the Director of HIV Prevention Programs at the National Department of Health, you set policy and you lead practice. And we want to know, how do these findings help you in HIV prevention in South Africa, and particularly amongst rape survivors? And how do we go forward? How do you lead an intergovernmental approach to prevent and respond to HIV risk amongst rape survivors? You have a huge portfolio, and this, is a very important part of it. So we would like to hear how we can help you and how you envisage that you will move forward based on the findings that we presented today. Over to you, Thato.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon again to everyone. I don't know if I can be seen or heard properly. I hope so.
We can see you and hear you. Thank you.
Oh, thanks. Thanks, Dr. Tlaleng, as well, for everything that you have mentioned, insightful information there. So again, my portfolio being prevention within National Department of Health, let me just say that, as we know, policy is influenced by research and by data. So really here, this is where MRC comes very handy, basically research agenda in general. And when it comes to gender-based violence and femicide, we know that this has already been articulated by our president as a crisis in the country. And first point is already really the fact that we have finalized or approved or taken up as a country the NSP for gender-based violence and femicide. And there's already an interministerial committee that is put in place to facilitate implementation thereof. And it's very important that within the HIV prevention program, we are able to actually follow up on not just the biomedical interventions, but also structural and social factors, because we know that when it comes to rape survivors, really, and gender-based violence and femicide, we know that we can't just deal with biomedical interventions to actually manage this. We need to ensure that socially and structurally we provide that support. So yes, the Department of Health is supporting implementation of PEP for rape survivors. And we know that we have just over 40 Thuthuzela centers. We know that Thuthuzela centers are an NPA initiative, but we also have just over 300 facilities that are adopting this model. At the same time, we are trying to ensure that over 50% of our 4,000 or so public health facilities are expanding and supporting implementation of PEP. We are training, and we are ensuring that our public health facilities managers are actually supporting implementation of PEP. However, a study like this that shows a 60% increased risk of HIV acquisition in women that have been raped is really enough information for us to consider this implementation of PEP, psychosocial support, and structural factors that affect the survivors of rape. So really what I would say is I fully agree with the recommendations of the study, and do believe that while we will be implementing PEP, and PrEP is going to be very important here as well, because while PEP would be like a short-term implementation or factor for rape survivors, PrEP will be important in moving forward to ensure that prevention is actually in course. So yeah, I think we just need to work together really with researchers in a multi-sectoral manner as well with the Department of Social Development too, to ensure that everyone actually comes on board to support rape survivors.
Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you very much. And I'm so glad that you emphasized the need for PrEP. We saw the increased incidence over time in these women, and having access to PrEP could also help minimize the risks. So I think it's very important. And thank you for also emphasizing the importance of the intergovernment work that we have. So don't go away yet, Thato. I can see you've got your seatbelt on. I'm glad you're not driving, but please stay on for a little bit longer. We need you. I'm going to ask Advocate Smith to come on now. And he's a critical person in the role of the legal and judicial processes for rape survivors. And I want to ask him, how he thinks the study can assist the processes and the right for justice for rape survivors, and the issue around identifying rape perpetrators and making sure that they go through the process in the legal framework in South Africa. So we're going to ask Advocate Smith, please, to give us his input from the law side. Thanks.
Thank you, Professor Gray, much appreciated. And thank you to Professor Abrams and the whole team for this valuable research. It's definitely useful information with absolutely excellent results from my side, I think. First of all, as I indicated from the onset, when we were privy to the results as it were submitted to us, what jumped up to mind for me immediately was, as we all know, in the previous respondents, in line with Dr. Mofokeng and Dr. Chidarikire, also mentioned the important role that we play in the justice system, specifically in looking at an effective and efficient system and to improve it constantly, which we know is a huge focus on us currently, specifically because of gender-based violence and femicide being regarded as a second pandemic. So why I'm saying this is also in relation to the fact that if we take this study and the information, and when we look at cases when they are being dealt with in a court of law, and after your much sought conviction, we go into the phase, as we call it, where evidence is required for purposes of assisting the court to arrive at a just verdict or a just sentence in this regard rather. So therefore, in this relation, this study will play, or this research results will play an immensely critical role, simply because of the reason, if we present information in court, but obviously it will have to be presented from an expert, in other words, an expert witness that will have to relate that in court, that because of what was found, that there's a 60% higher risk of the unfortunate victims that were exposed to rape to be HIV positive at a later stage, absolutely provides that crucial aggravating circumstances that we sometimes require to assist the court to motivate to the court that the most severe sentences should be imposed. In other words, it's a factor that the court will definitely take into consideration. Obviously, there are other factors too that goes without saying, and the expert witnesses that will have to testify and present this information in court will obviously present it in sort of like a simplistic format so that it's clearly understood. But I think the crucial part is that because of the fact that it was found that these victims are 60% more exposed to a higher risk of getting HIV, being HIV positive, is essential for aggravating circumstances. I mean, in many instances, we know that apart from all the other factors and the merits of each case that needs to be determined to actually justify a just sentence, this will be an additional factor that play a crucial role. So that's the one point. The second point is, as I've also indicated to Professor Abrams, that the other crucial part in this regard is this will be information that we will definitely include in our skills development in the advanced training for prosecutors, so that they will have this information available at their fingertips and that they can utilize it accordingly in a court of law when they do have the expert witness to present that in court. The fourth part is, or the third part is, if we look at the crucial link between social context awareness training of our experts, this is another crucial aspect that should be find that part of focus in that particular training model as well. We will utilize this information to also have a better understanding of what these victims are actually going through after, post the whole rape scenario, and how this can be utilized in a court by means of evidence, even if it means by the presentation or the presenting in chief of the witness, him or herself, or by means of a victim impact statement report or victim impact statement that will be useful information that can be utilized in that regard. As our previous speaker or the previous respondent, Dr. Chidarikire, also mentioned, yes, we work very closely with the Department of Health Institute of Care Centers, and we've got 55 of these sites nationally, and we're in the process of extending an additional number of these sites as well, that will add on the list of having more sites available. But this plays a crucial link in that rape care management of these victims so that we can ultimately assist a better service. And ultimately, we know that when these cases are going to court, and yes, there are massive backlogs due to various interdependencies and reasons, but I think this information will be so much useful when we want to present our argument in court to arrive at a just sentence. So for me, that's a useful combination. It's a sentencing part, it's skills development, social context awareness training, and then a crucial role that we as stakeholders can play for an integrated, united front against this whole concept. Thank you. I'm done.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Dr. Shai, I'm going to hand over to you to lead the question and answer session. And you have around 30 minutes to do that. So we welcome you taking over and doing the facilitation of the question and answer. Thank you.
Thank you, Glenda, and good afternoon, colleagues. So as a start, I would like to ask Naeemah a question just to bring her back in. And then I will then open up to answering some of the questions that our team has not yet addressed that are on the Q&A panel, and maybe invite a couple of comments. So Naeemah, I would like to ask you if you can comment on the mental health aspects of rape, both from the work that you have done globally and why you believe that it is an important, what you've said in your presentation is an important recommendation coming out of your work.
Yeah, so Nwabisa, mental health is something that rape survivors and those who care for rape will tell you is one of the most enduring impact of rape, right? So there's no denying that that is the factor that, and it interplays with each other. We know that trauma happens a lot in South Africa. In fact, we should be a country that are experts at trauma care, trauma-focused care. But we're not. We have all the women that are attending rape services, and very often our focus has been that immediate period. And we respond with that immediate period in trying to contain the feelings, contain what's happening, and actually what we have observed in the study that we did when we looked at capacity assessment of mental health care within rape services, we often saw that the lay counselor, all they were equipped with was to tell the woman what's happening next, assist her to talk about it, so a lot of that, but there was very little psychoeducation, for example, because psychoeducation really helps women to understand what's happening to her. And you cannot take in that psychoeducation. So we need to actually repeat, we need to see the woman often. And the role of stigma, rape stigma, is immense because it really impacts on how we experience the depression and the PTSD and the suicidality. So often we just leave the woman to cope on their own. And no wonder they stop coming to services, they don't tell anybody. But that really impacts on the ability to gain self-worth again. And this sets them on a trajectory of maybe using alcohol, of maybe using to cope. And this affects in how they are engage in relationships which are risky. So we need long-term quality care that's effective. And we have seen it actually. There is evidence in the DRC, in conflict settings, where lay counselors were trained in evidence-based interventions for trauma. And they were able to assist women who were survivors of rape that was associated with the war there. But we can't do it here in South Africa. So that's a question we really need to ask. Now, I know it's funding and it is resourceful, but this is what we have to do. And we have to find a way of doing it. Nwabisa, we can talk a lot about mental health here.
I have a follow-up question.
Now, I just want us to also to realize that mental health has always been like a stepchild in the whole funding that they get from government, I think. They've never been very well funded. The impact, the burden is now being recognized in our burden studies. We see the role that mental health has on cardiovascular disease, on cancers, and here we're seeing it now in terms of HIV as well.
Thanks, Naeemah. I have a follow-up question. So there's a question on our Q&A panel that is asking whether you're in a position to say which TCCs were part of the study and which primary healthcare centers you worked in. So the question is if you're in a position to say.
I would prefer not to. I think I did tell you it was in Durban. Did I say that? I can't remember if that was in my presentation. Mm-hmm. It is a Durban-based one. That question can be addressed to Pierre Smith. I think he can decide whether he wants to. But we had a fantastic relationship with the TCCs, no doubt. The doctors, the nurses, the people that work there, we had a 4-year relationship with them. Really, there's some fantastic people that work at the TCCs.
I have another question. Do you have any data on the percentage of women using rape services that you can give to indicate who used and who dropped out? How many dropped out, perhaps, from your study?
No, so our study didn't look at how many women use rape services. Our study was a very particular group. It's this woman that entered who decided that she will report the rape and she entered the health service. We don't have the broader, bigger picture of what proportion of women experience a rape and does not go into health services. What we do have from a Gauteng study, where women who were raped were asked, did you go to services? Did you report the rape? And 1 in 25 women said, no, I did not report the rape. I'm telling it to you in this research environment, but I did not report it. And that's why at the start of my study, I talked about how the number of rapes reported to police in our last reporting period was about 42,000. Now, if we realistically think that 1 in 25 women report a rape, we must multiply that 42,000 by 25, and we'll get to 1 million women. Yes, so we have got a big problem of rape in the country. There's no doubt, and I think we need to move on and do things about it. Yeah.
I suppose it's also telling that those high levels of unreporting speak to how we revamp the services. I just have one last question before I move to our attendees. So there's a question asking whether the study explored what the post-exposure completion rates were among the women who had received it in your study.
Oh, yeah, we do. Goodness. I can look it up quickly and tell you. So yes, for the women who were negative, we asked them at 3 months whether they completed, whether they adhered to PEP.
But that is self-report, right?
That is self-report, yeah. No, you will always just get self-reporting of it. So this is just what we saw. So we had nurses that worked at the study, and what the nurses said, the women would often come, it's 20 days since the rape, they would often come and they will have the whole packet of PEP with them, and we'll ask them, so why didn't you start? Didn't you? And we actually had to remove the PEP, and this was done in a previous study also, where people really had poor understanding of how they must take the PEP, why they must take the PEP. And remember, in a previous study that we also did, the medication given for pregnancy caused quite a lot of nausea for women. So when women take the PEP, they take quite a lot of drugs right at the start. So when they take that and they don't get anti-nausea medication, the side effects of the PEP really makes them feel horrible. Remember, this woman are traumatized. She really fears possibly for many things. And then she has to take something that's really terrible as well. And that we know has affected. Stigma has also affects adherence. We've seen in a study how self-stigmatization, how people start believing that they are blamed for the study, how they are ashamed about allowing themselves to be raped. And because they're not supported, that interferes with their ability to take the PEP. Yeah.
Thank you, Naeemah. Now I would like to invite some of our attendees who have questions to also continue to ask questions. I have a couple of questions here around the issue of TCCs, and I would like to address the question to Pierre. So is Pierre still on? Sorry,
Yes, I am.
Okay, so the question, Pierre, is around the domestic funding of the TCCs, whether there are any plans to fund them domestically in order to ensure, I suppose, the widespread availability of TCCs in all around the country.
Thank you, Dr. Shai. Thanks for the question. Yes, indeed. Remember, currently the 55 sites are government funded. So that means they're included in the NPA voted budget fund. So they are being funded in totality by government. However, it is indeed correct that we also rely on crucial services that are being provided by civil society organizations, specifically when it comes to trauma containment services that are provided to survivors or victims of these offenses. So that is a crucial link. And in that regard, we will also have the support of DSD, Department of Social Development, that assists us in that regard. Yes, we're also looking constantly into having a more comprehensive process in place to include a bigger pound of funds so that we can have more of these service providers to be funded in relation to that crucial services that are being provided. And that's an ongoing process. But I think what is essential, when we started off the TCCs, we relied heavily on donor funding, but that has now been a process of the past because it's been taken over by government in totality, as I've already explained. Thank you.
Thank you very much. While I assess whether we are able to have our attendees ask questions on voice, I wanted to just get Naeemah to quickly explain the link around women's vulnerability to HIV related to the risk behavior. Our panelist had to leave, Dr. Mofokeng. Do you have any comment about what she was saying about how we need to be careful about the interpretation of risk and exposure to HIV within the linkage to post-rape effects? Do you have a comment for us on that?
Nwabi, you're asking me, right?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, yeah, that is right, that there is a very real possibility that we are going to start blaming women for acquiring HIV and for her behavior, and we need to be very careful. We do need to recognize that the woman experienced a trauma, a rape, and that she might not receive the support and the care and the healing processes that was required. And this places her in a situation where she, first of all, her self-esteem is affected by the rape stigma as well as by the depression and PTSD that together interferes with her ability to cope and to make choices and to make decisions around it. We shouldn't just talk about the woman's behavior as such. It is really about the woman not being able, given her situation, to make good choices. We know from intimate partner violence studies that women who are more likely to, from intimate partner violence and HIV studies, we have seen that women are more likely to have partnerships with men who are more risky, right? They are less able, because of the power differentials, because of gender inequality, because of their acquiescence to inequalities, they are less likely to be able to negotiate safe sex. The rape might put me in a position where they lost a job. They have really economic struggles, and they might have, and they get into relationships where they have to do transactional sex. So there is this combination of factors that, and it's not just one single factor that leads to women into behavior. She might use alcohol as a form of coping, and when you do that, you use alcohol, you are less able, and you less able to determine a risky situation. We know that for intimate partner violence as well, that women who are under the influence are less able to discern a situation or a relationship that might be risky. And so this is why I'm harping, I know, on the issue about needing to take action around rape stigma. We've seen in other analysis that we've done that rape stigma plays a big role in how people experience the mental health and how they're not able to cope. And it really affects their ability to cope. And because self-stigmatization was much more common than external stigmatization. So that means they were more likely to accept the stigma of the blame of the rape and to feel ashamed and embarrassed about it. And therefore they do not seek support and they might not get to the help that they need. And these are the women that are also possibly not believed by those that support them. I've seen in the research where very often initially, particularly young girls, the parents support them. The parents would believe that the rape happened within a certain context. And after a week or two, that parent changes their minds and they do not support and they do not believe the girl anymore. Adolescents were particularly vulnerable to that kind of change in how people support them.
Thank you, Naeemah. Now I would like to give Dr. Thato an opportunity to respond to a question. And my question for you, Dr. Thato, is what do you think the Department of Health will do in order to enhance mental health services in light of the research that we have discussed in this webinar? And also in that context, how would you suggest PrEP discussions be introduced to survivors during that post-rape interaction, where they have to consider many issues that that are coming up for them after that ordeal? Over to you, Thato.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to keep my video off just to preserve bandwidth because then I started moving. In terms of PrEP for survivors of rape, all we really need to do is to ensure that we somehow put an amendment in terms of guidance of our PEP guidelines. We may be aware that we've just released new. We are actually clearly in the guideline that, you know, we have evidence, we have data, we have research that supports this. So it's really a matter of incorporating. And in November, I think from the 9th to the 14th, we actually disseminated SRH guidelines, and that included our new PEP guidelines as well. So what we need to do moving forward, really in terms of training, is to ensure that as we train on manuals for survivors of rape and sexual assault, we include rape survivors in this way in terms of management for both PEP and PrEP. I don't see it as a challenge at this point, because even though it may not have been necessarily specifically articulated, but anybody who needs PrEP and basically requests or actively requests does not get turned back. Sex workers are the first population that was provided with PrEP, then MSM, then we moved to adolescent girls and young women, and we are trying to expand in facilities to provide PrEP. And as I've said, also we have facilities that are adopting the TCCs, the NPA initiative of TCCs, but at the same time, we are trying to ensure that we train our public health facilities to ensure that implementation of PrEP is expanded. And then in terms of mental health, actually at the moment with our SRH and R, and in particular STI program, which falls under my directorate, we are actually working together with mental health to see how we can support key populations in particular, and how we can manage mental health in terms of psychosocial support as we implement and provide HIV testing services, especially in young people. So this is basically something that we will probably just maybe need to reach out to yourselves or the researchers, but also to ensure that implementers have this in place. I mean, we already have the NSP for GBV and femicide, so we just need to ensure that there is clear articulation of what we need clarified in there. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Chidarikire. Now I would like to ask one last question to Pierre. And Pierre, the question is the NPA looking to adding mobile solutions, especially for the hotspots that have been identified in the country on GBV and femicide?
Thank you, Dr. Shai. I've noted the question in a chat box from Sipsia. Good question. That's not so easy to be answered. We're looking at all possible scenarios on how we can extend and expand also the TCC services. So that is one of the options that's currently on the table under discussion. But the implementation of it might be a bit of a challenge at this stage, but we're looking at all the information and also to ensure that the services are more spread throughout the country. Our goal is to have it aligned with where the FCS units are that's being established by SAP. So that's the ultimate goal. So that's one of the solutions we're looking into. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Naeemah, one quick question is whether the study explored levels of understanding and interpretation of what consent means among your study sample.
What consent means?
Yeah, I think it's about how informed consent was done,
yeah,
but in terms of understanding whether the participants understood what that actually meant.
Yeah, okay, that's a good question. So, yeah, we were doing the study ethically was a very important part of the whole study. So consent procedures were long because we asked different consents for different part. And what we were trained to do was to ask the woman to ask, there was a set of questions where they were asked after a part of the consent procedure were done. We'll stop and we will ask the woman, can you explain? We'll ask an explanation of part of it. That was to make sure she understood. The other part was that every time they returned, they were reconsented. I'm just checking if I'm using the right word. They were reconsented. So we reminded them, the first time you came, you agreed. Remember, we're taking bloods from you. We're testing you for HIV. We're doing this. We're going to test you for pregnancy. And so for each aspect of the study, we had different consent procedures. So I would like to believe, and I wish there was some of the right staff here that could explain to you. And so that's why that process took long. And that's why we had to make sure that the Rice Clinic were such a place that wasn't, it can never be pleasant research. So it wasn't an environment that were very, that caused further harm for the woman or any harm for the woman. So I would like to believe, yes, our consent procedures were done well. The woman at the end, imagine coming back to us over eight visits. They knew what was coming. they knew us very well. They're very proud to be part of the Rice study in the end. Yeah, but so ethical issues and consenting was a very important aspect of it. And you can imagine if women did drop out, you saw that there was lost on follow-up, but it was mainly around people's lives just becoming difficult for them and they're moving on they found a new job. Lots of these women were moving in and out of jobs, small little jobs that they were getting, and we certainly allowed them to go to better prospects.
Thank you, Naeemah, and thank you to the panelists for all your responses and all your contributions. Now I'll hand over to Glenda. Thanks.
Thank you. I think I want to emphasize and underscore what Naeemah just said, that this is an incredibly difficult study to do. And it is both traumatic for the staff, the investigators, as well as the participants. So, we really appreciate that call of you being on the coal face and having to, and your staff and the study team having to walk a long path with these women in a longitudinal study. So I just want to acknowledge, that I understand how difficult studies like this are, and the results too are very poignant and sad, and behove us to act and work together to make sure that we address the issues that women face with gender-based violence. So again, I want to acknowledge you, Naeemah, for a wonderful job, a job well done. I want to acknowledge the team, the RICE team, for conducting the study, and we really appreciate the work that you have done. These aren't pleasant results. They're sobering. The incidence is high. The HIV incidence amongst of women that have exposed to rape are incredibly high, which means that we have to do something. It behoves us to translate this information into action. So I want to acknowledge you, and I also want to acknowledge the panel for working in this very hard field, and for continue to fight for the rights of women, and the right for women to feel safe and free in a society and not have to worry about gender-based violence. So I want to thank again the panel for everything. I want to thank also Patrick and the technical team for keeping us on the straight and narrow and keeping us connected, and for the Nabisa for doing a wonderful question and answer. So thank you, panelists. Thank you, Naeemah, and thank you for everything that you've done. And let's not forget that our day, every day, is a day to fight for women's rights in South Africa. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Glenda. And I also actually want to thank the Medical Research Council for supporting me in doing the study. It's funded by the SAMRC, so it's government funding, and that's why we really, for me, that's really important, that we should not waste the outcome of the study. So thank you very much, and thank you everybody. I had a great team in the background. We call ourselves the Gurus, Gender and Health Research Unit Group, and the RICE team, and to the panelists as well. Thank you very much for coming and joining us and giving us your great thoughts on what this means for South Africa.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you very much.